All right, next we're going to move forward and discuss license plate readers, legislation dealing with this issue got to conference committee in 2013. Conference committee, I'm not even sure, I think we met once in 14 again, and this issue wasn't resolved. I have a number of people on my list to testify, law enforcement. I don't know if this is the order in which you're testifying, but I have Rob Allen from Ramsey County Sheriff, Jeff Potts from Bloomington, Chief of Police, Mike Aschenbrenner, Mendota Heights, and Ken Reed of the St. Paul Police Department, and Gordon Ramsey of the Duluth Chief of Police, who I also see is here to testify on body cameras. Welcome to the committee. If you'd like to state your name for the record, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Good morning. I'm Inspector Rob Allen, Director of Planning and Policy Analysis for the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you briefly about automatic license plate readers, or A.L.P.R. A.L.P.R. technology is essentially a camera that is either mounted on a vehicle or on a stationary platform that, when turned on, uses computer technology to continually scan the environment it's operating in and identify license plate numbers. The A.L.P.R. cameras then record the license plate number, the date, time, and location where the plate was seen. The technology may also record an image of the plate so the person using the A.L.P.R. can confirm that the technology scanned the digits on the page correctly. I should note that there are no restrictions on who can own and operate an A.L.P.R. There are currently businesses that operate networks of A.L.P.R. cameras for a variety of reasons, including asset recovery, market research, and crime prevention. Private industry is not regulated with respect to the use of their A.L.P.R. devices. Private industry can sell A.L.P.R. data that they collect. The unique feature of law enforcement A.L.P.R. is that we can upload a hot list to our A.L.P.R. devices that will signal the officer when a vehicle that is on the hot list is spotted by the A.L.P.R. device. Currently, the Minnesota Department of Public Safety maintains a state hot list that includes stolen vehicles, vehicles which are wanted for certain felony crimes, vehicles owned by level 3 sex offenders, and so forth. Some jurisdictions also add their own hot list to the A.L.P.R. data with data such as vehicles with numerous unpaid parking fines. It's important to note that A.L.P.R. technology does not capture any personal identifiable data. It captures an image and recording of a fully visible license plate. The A.L.P.R. data is not connected in any way to DVS computers that show to whom that plate is registered. Further, unlike private industry, law enforcement agencies guard the A.L.P.R. data in much the same way we guard criminal histories or police reports. A.L.P.R. records can be queried to see if we have records of a particular vehicle in a particular place. And I'll let my colleagues describe ways in which those queries have helped solve crimes in the past. But I want to point out that querying A.L.P.R. history creates an audit trail. And the querying of license plates to find out who owns them also creates an audit trail. My agency, like most of the agencies here, have strict policies in place stating who can access that stored data and under what conditions. We guard that data as strongly as we store other confidential records, and those policies are enforced by the sheriff, who is accountable to the voters and faces election every 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Inspector Allen. You stated the only difference between law enforcement's usage of this L.P.R. technology and that of, say, a private sector actor was that you could upload it with a hot list?
That's correct.
Officer Allen, Sheriff Lesh.
Thank you. Inspector Allen and Sheriff Inspector Allen, do you really think this is the only difference? You don't see any other differences?
Inspector Allen.
Madam Chair, Representative, there may be other differences in terms of how the equipment is used by law enforcement versus private sectors, but in terms of the technology, That's the difference, that's the significant difference.
Okay, well, Madam Chair,
Representative
and
Lesh.
Inspector Allen, I appreciate the answer. And I would posit that there is a really, really fundamental difference. Is that Walmart, if they use this, they can't put you in jail. They can't detain you for reasonable suspicion, or hold you for probable cause, or set bail, or a host of other things that have real implications for the average citizen on the street. So I don't mean to put you on the spot there, but I think it's really important to note that as a difference. And I appreciate you pointing out that this is available to the private sector market. But the reason why it's different for government is because of the unique powers held by government. So I just wanted to point that out.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh,
Inspector Allen.
I agree. It's not the A.L.P.R. technology that has the ability to arrest people. It's law enforcement officers who are using the technology, and I was speaking to the technology itself, not the powers of law enforcement agencies versus Walmart.
Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for the gentleman from Ramsey County, and I'll ask probably the same question of everybody unless they just offer up the answer. Heard some stories about private sector organizations, private property that has L.P.R. Or L.P.R. networks on site, sharing that data with government and law enforcement entities. Is Ramsey County Sheriff's Office or Ramsey County Law Enforcement collecting data from private entities, these private networks that you're referring to, in any way, shape, or form?
Inspector Allen.
Madam Chair, Senator, we are not doing that on a regular basis. We have, I believe, on occasion, used it in the process of an investigation to see if a certain vehicle had entered a place in response to an investigation we're conducting. But we don't regularly gather data from those places and store it.
Senator Peterson.
So just to be clear, you do, if you're like spot checking, if there's reason to believe that that network comes into contact with a suspected vehicle, you may share data with that private L.P.R. And then just to clarify again, you are not, I mean, because it wouldn't take much with the information capacity that we have now to just share the data automatically and run a hot list against just another database. I mean, that would take virtually nothing to do, and you're saying that that doesn't happen, that it's just this sort of spot check or whatever you want to call it, if you have reason to believe that that network came into contact with.
Madam Chair.
Inspector Allen.
Madam Chair, Senator Peterson. No, we do not connect to any private entities. The only occasion in which we have used a private A.L.P.R. is to see if they have a record of a vehicle wanted in respect to an investigation. And we'd only ask for that information on that particular vehicle.
Inspector Allen, can you also add to that, do you keep a list or database of surveillance systems held by the private sector within your jurisdiction?
Madam Chair, I don't believe we do.
And so if if you are investigating a particular crime, you then go individually contact businesses in the area to see whether or not they have surveillance information in that period of time or location.
Madam Chair, that's correct.
Chair Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Inspector Allen, I thought of another question that I wanted to ask that I don't think I asked you in the last couple of sessions this came through. In the Star Tribune investigation of the Minneapolis Police Department for the month of June 2012, they were able to determine that of the several million hits, that 99.2% of them or the images were non-hit data. So 99.2% of the images held were on folks for whom there was no reasonable suspicion, but you still held the information about their location at any given time. What percentage of Ramsey County's plate images are non-hit data like that. Do you have that information?
Inspector Allen?
Mr. Chair, Representative Lesh, the answer is I don't have that information, and the reason I don't is that we don't distinguish pictures of non-hit vehicles from vehicles that appear on the hot list. The information stored is only a picture, a date, and a location that vehicle was seen. So we have no information unless we do a separate query as to who that vehicle registers to or whether it was wanted for some other crime, if it's not on the hot list maintained by the state of Minnesota.
Chair Lesh?
But it does, the L.P.R., Inspector Allen, does show you when your deputy's in the car, it will say whether or not it flags that particular plate as being on the hot list. Am I correct?
Inspector Allen?
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, the A.L.P.R. will create a signal if a car that it suspects is on the hot list is seen by the A.L.P.R., yes.
Okay, so Madam Chair.
Chair Lesh?
So then, I guess I'm trying to figure out where between the time that the deputy sees it on the street and the collection of the data, that distinction disappears. Clearly, at one point, there was a designation because the deputy could see it on the street, but you're telling me now there's no way for you to figure out whether there was a hit or there wasn't a hit. I guess, maybe Madam Chair, I'd ask.
Well, Chair Lesh, I'm guessing that it doesn't seem like maybe they're not tracking the total number of images you collect, but it's a pretty easy computation. Number of images collected versus number of hits would give you your percentage. So are you not collecting, you don't keep a running tally on the number of images you collect?
Madam Chair, the answer is I don't believe we do. I can double check the system, but the other thing is that just because the system alerts doesn't mean that it's a hit. For example, when we first installed the cameras, we got a hit on a possible stolen vehicle, and it was a mailbox that it hit on. It's not a perfect system. So just because an alarm sounds in the car doesn't mean that it's a legitimate hit per se. So our interest is actually not in keeping those records for purposes other than criminal prosecution. So we can keep track of or do research to find out how many times the A.L.P.R. devices, which are very new in our county, have led to criminal prosecution, but it's not data that's automatically stored by the system.
Just, Madam Chair, I would just ask if you, Inspector Allen, if you could check in that, find out if you do keep it, I would appreciate the overall of the efforts.
Senator Peterson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So you had said that you sort of go on occasion by occasion to private entities and get the information regarding whatever surveillance capabilities they have, and that you don't have a record on file or something of those establishments that do. How would you know which area or which establishment to go to and then obtain that information if you don't keep a record of who actually has surveillance systems in place? In other words, if you already know that they were within the proximity of a surveillance device, why would you even need to go to them and check their surveillance technology?
Yes.
Do you understand what I'm saying? How would you know where to look if you didn't already know that there was a surveillance capability in that, on that piece of property?
Inspector Allen?
Madam Chair, Senator, the answer is that we do it the same way we always have, which is, if, for example, in a recent homicide investigation, we thought that a vehicle might have been at a given business. So we went to the business, we asked them what kind of surveillance technology you have, and that's how we record it. That's typically how we do it. If we know that a vehicle was at point A and we know that a vehicle was at point B, we may canvass businesses or locations between point A and point B to see what kind of surveillance technology, if any, they have.
Please continue if you're done. Next officer.
Madam Chair, my name is Jeff Potts. I'm the police chief from Wilmington, and I'm here with two other police chiefs, Chief Gordon Ramsey to my left. He's the police chief in Duluth, and Chief Mike Ashenbrenner, who is from the Mendota Heights Police Department. We are here to tell give three examples of where A.L.P.R was used and beneficial in solving crimes in our communities. I'll start.
Thank you. Welcome to the committee, Chief.
Thanks. I'll start in telling a story of a case in Bloomington. A short time ago, we had a series. I've told this story before, so forgive me if you've heard it before, but I will tell tell this case again. Series of crimes, serious crimes in Bloomington during the winter. They involved an individual throwing some objects out of his car as he was driving down Normandale Boulevard. If you're not familiar with Bloomington, Normandale Boulevard is the southern extension of Highway 100. It runs north and south the length of Bloomington. And he was driving, victims would be driving either northbound or southbound on Normandale Boulevard, and just suddenly they would, their vehicle would be struck by an object. And usually it would be in the front of the vehicle. It would oftentimes puncture the radiator, and we would call to the scene of what the driver would describe as, I don't know what happened, but my car just got hit by something. We had 14 of these incidents, starting with some fairly small objects, a glass bottle. There was one that was a rock, a smaller rock, and we began to kind of paint the picture that this wasn't just something that was coincidental, it was intentional. They were happening at night, they were happening as a vehicle just passed in the opposite direction, and one of the cases was a 15-pound hex head dumbbell that had been cut in half, and it was basically punctured into the radiator. And we had officers that were out doing surveillance in the area, trying to find the person that was doing this, trying to be in the right place at the right time, but frankly, it just wasn't working. This went on for at least a couple of months. Like I said, there were 14 incidents, including the hex head dumbbell, a rock that was about 8 inches by 8 inches, an electrical motor that was thrown out of the window. And keep in mind, this is a 45-mile-an-hour roadway. If a car is traveling north at 45, the car coming south is at 45. It's about a 90-mile-an-hour closing speed, and there's quite a bit of energy and damage that can be done by even a small object. Fortunately, early on in this, there were no injuries, but there was a lot of damage to the vehicles. Word had spread fast that Normandale Boulevard is a very dangerous place in Bloomington, and if you know Bloomington, that's the west side of Bloomington. It's typically not a place where people are afraid to be. It's a pretty safe area, in my opinion. Gallon-sized jug of water was thrown out at one point. One of the last incidents was a steel vise. It was a bench vise, if you're familiar with, and it was thrown out the window. It was bouncing down across the pavement. It jumped and went through the windshield of the oncoming car in this case. It penetrated the windshield. It hit the steering wheel, fortunately, and then the driver's face. It broke his jaw and took out 9 teeth. The driver was instantly put unconscious. Fortunately, there were 2 other people. The driver of this car, incidentally, was an Army recruiter who was coming back to the office from taking a physical fitness test with 2 other military personnel. And fortunately, one of the other persons in the car grabbed the steering wheel while the driver was unconscious. He also was able to grab the emergency brake and stop the car. Fortunately, nobody else was hurt. However, the driver was seriously hurt. That was the first case in this investigation where we had serious bodily injury. Several surgeries. The driver's jaw was basically wired back together, and he's fine. However, he has some ongoing issues with regard to this injury. This investigation took a turn at that point because of the severity of the injuries, and that we continued to amp up their surveillance, continued to do more patrols in the area, but it was a real frustrating case. At one point, we developed kind of a weak suspect, the name of a person, and we were able to figure out vehicles that that person owned. And 68 days after one of our license plate reader cars was in the area, 68 days later, we had a scan of a vehicle on Normandale Boulevard at about the time that one of these incidents took place. And it was that evidence that really sealed the case. We were able to make an arrest, and eventually the suspect pled guilty to assault and is in prison today because of that, primarily because of that license plate scan on data that was 68 days old. In that case, fortunately for us, resolved with an arrest and somebody. Obviously, there are a lot of cases that do go unsolved, but this is one I'm happy to report that had a lot of fear and kind of panic in the neighborhoods. But fortunately for this technology, we were able to use it, ultimately secure a guilty plea in that case.
Thank you, Chief Potts. Any questions? Chair Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Chief Potts. Why, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but why did it take 68 days for you guys to think to check the license plate or your data from that day? Am I misunderstanding how this went?
Chief Potts.
Madam Chair, Representative Lash, it didn't take us 68 days to think to check the database. It took us 68 days to find a suspect that we could tie to a vehicle that we could then use to check the database. We had no name, we had no vehicle. We had incidents that were reported to us. We had police reports, but it was a really serious whodunit. And until you have a vehicle or a license plate to try and query the data, we weren't able to use the data to try and help solve the case.
Madam Chair, Chief Potts,
Chair
did
Lesh.
you, with that data, were you able to tie the same suspect to the other incidents, the other 4 or 5 incidents you mentioned of objects being thrown out of windows, or was it only this one instance?
Chief Potts.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, we were not able to tie him to all of them, but we were able to tie him to some of them. I don't think it was more than a couple, but it was a couple that the time and place that his car was at was so important to the case that I think it became a critical piece of evidence in the case. It was not all of them.
Thank you.
Because, if I may, Representative Lesh, we didn't have scans in the area of all the other gates as well. The officers just simply weren't there with those moving A.L.P.R systems.
And Madam Chair,
Chair Lesh.
Chief Potts, I'll ask you the same question I asked of Inspector Allen. Can you tell me, based upon the images retained by Bloomington, what percentage of those images are hit data versus what percentage are non-hit data?
Chief Potts.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, I cannot tell you that percentage. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
Madam Chair, Chief
Chair
Potts, could you get that information to me offline?
Sure.
Chief Potts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll ask the Chief, I'll ask the same question for Bloomington Police. Do you share, do private entities share A.L.P.R data and other surveillance data on a regular basis, or maybe even on a scheduled basis with Bloomington, or do you have access to the information from certain private entities?
Chief Potts.
Madam Chair, Senator, we do it in much the same way Inspector Allen mentioned. It is case specific, and if we are aware of that information at a specific place in the course of an investigation, and I can say this, I'm not aware that we have in a certain case, but I'm aware that that is something that we could do. But we do not have anything programmed or automatically fed to us, nor do we automatically feed data to any other entities.
Senator Peterson.
Similarly, do you have any LPRs or surveillance agreements, or where you, or private properties hosting police, surveillance equipment or LPRs in general?
Yes, we have one agreement with a private entity in Bloomington.
Any additional questions for Chief Potts? Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I don't know if you have anybody on your testifier list that represents private industry or not.
We do not at this time.
Okay, so Chief Potts, I want to ask a question, and maybe you can't answer this, but perhaps some of the other testifiers or somebody around the table can help me understand this, but I'm hearing a lot of reference to private industry and the use of LPRs and the fact that they're not regulated. I think I heard that from the very first testifier. But my question is, you know, I can understand private industry's use of security systems and why that would be important to them, but I'm having a difficult time understanding why they would operate a A.L.P.R system when the data that's collected through that system is not accessible by private industry. So my sense would tell me that in the event that they had a situation at their business, that they could share that data with law enforcement, who then would be able to access, say, a license plate and see, you know, who that particular vehicle belongs to. But beyond that, I'm having a difficult time understanding what the value is to private industry for collecting data from an A.L.P.R. And now that I know that they can store it potentially forever, you know, what the reasoning might be behind that. And I don't know if it's a huge widespread thing, or if this is just a couple of places, or what the answer might be.
Well, Representative Simonson, if I was the marketing director of Mall of America and I was trying to decide where I was going to spend my marketing dollars in the region, I might want to know what percentage of the license plates were Minnesota versus North Dakota versus Illinois. I think that the uses for information and the ability to not only collect information at your place of business, but then layer that with other databases, it gets you to the point where you can micro-target people for Google ads and Facebook ads now, to the point of where they live, or where their residence is, their age, if they like to buy a particular in a particular strata as designer goods, or if they're eBay shoppers or whatever. I mean, it's getting quite sophisticated, and something I knew before I even came here, knowledge is power. And so I think that use of surveillance and technology to gain information by the private sector, the people that they interact with, is an exploding science and art. That's a new industry that's very profitable, but businesses see a value in their business model using this information as well.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. So would it be safe to conclude then, unless I'm missing something, that really the only data that could be collected by private industry would be necessarily the state that's displayed on that particular license plate? Beyond that, I can't think of any particular value that data might have, unless I'm missing something.
Madam Chair,
Chair Lesh.
I only bring this up, Representative Simonson, because for two reasons. One, in my job as a prosecutor, I do a lot of work with the big box retailers on University Avenue, many of whom I know would love to be able to track the license plates in and out of their lot and match them to the routine frequent flyer shoplifters they have in their stores, thereby putting them on high alert that another sticky-fingered individual is entering. But the largest database, unless I'm wrong, in the state of Minnesota of criminal folks after the BCA, I think still remains Target Corporation. And Target Corporation is retaining all of our personal information for whatever reasons that we don't know. I have no idea, but they're on a tear of collecting this, and I don't think we've had a lot of investigation about what that's for or what they can legally use it for. So I just wanted to bring that up about Target.
And if I just, this is an editorial comment, but I was chief author of legislation that provided standards for what we called the data miners. And I think that took 4 years to get even the most basic standards and controls enacted. So while we struggle here with the information that government collects and how it's used, my personal history with trying to regulate the private sector, it's equally, if not more challenging. So it is, but I think the time has come. I think that the general public, given all the data breaches, the issues with the IRS, some of the other things that have occurred. I believe that the public is becoming more aware of this issue and its effect on their daily lives, and hopefully at some point it'll be easier for policymakers to make strides in these areas. So I'm sorry for the digression here. Any other questions for Chief Potts? Senator Peterson?
Just to follow up on the agreement with the private entity, just to be clear, Bloomington Police is operating and maintaining and receiving the information. The agreement is that this location is just hosting or allowing for the space for these devices to operate, or is small, let's say that's the entity. Are they maintaining the and housing the information and relaying it to you, or are they just simply giving you the space to do it?
Chief Potts?
Madam Chair, Senator, that is the location. You picked it. Mall of America is the only location that we have an agreement with. It's a private-public partnership. We obviously very serious our role in trying to keep people safe here, and do a lot of things from a security and policing standpoint in those efforts. In this particular case, although the agreement allows for there to be a connection to the system, there is no connection to the system. We entered into an agreement when we installed the equipment, because it's private property, that there be some access to some parts of the data. However, they have not ever connected to the system. There's very specific language in the agreement that covers what they could access or use data for. It's solely for the purposes of safety, security, and traffic management, not marketing, not other things that were discussed here just a few minutes ago. But the system is not accessed by Mall of America. The agreement does call for it, or does address that in terms of they have the ability by agreement, but they have not done so. And if they ever were to, they have agreed to follow Chapter 13 and acknowledge the classification of this data. And it's also, again, solely for the purposes of safety, security, and traffic management, i.e. car counting, in terms of capacity levels in a parking lot, for example.
Just
Senator Peterson?
thank you, Madam Chair, Chief. Is there any financial agreement between Bloomington Police and the Mall of America for doing this? Are they, for example, are you paying them, or are they paying you, or for hosting the surveillance equipment?
Chief Potts?
Madam Chair, Senator Nolan, the system was acquired through some Homeland Security grant dollars and through the city of Bloomington as the applicant for that. And so since the installation of the equipment, there's no financial agreement with Mall of America on the system. It was put place by the city through grant dollars from a few different sources.
Any additional questions for Chief Potts? All right, thank you very much. And Chief Aschenbrenner from Mendota Heights, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. My name is Mike Aschenbrenner. I'm the chief of the Mendota Heights Police Department. This is not a discussion I ever planned on weighing into. We stayed away from license plate readers based on the discussion that's going on today. We knew the very first time we saw it that it was an extremely useful tool. Unfortunately, as Mr. Gamberling alluded to, we are not IT people, and small departments will struggle with this across the state. We're not trained IT people, and information technology and squad cars is painful, to say the least. You can get running and operating and gathering all of the information that is required for us. Unfortunately, last July, my department, my community was thrown into this unwillingly. It became extremely personal for our community, the families involved, with the highly publicized death of a police officer in July. And I think it became onus upon me to help try and change perceptions about how some people feel about this. The crime made people feel different about how they live in their homes and how their community is. And that is something that we see, as Chief Potts had said earlier. It's very personal when you hit in the face with a bike. It's very personal when someone dies outside their home. We struggle with this as a law enforcement community continuously, day in and day out. As data practices go, and Mr. Gemmerling also alluded to this, the citizens' expectations of us, when I say us, I mean all of us, you have a huge task in front of you, starting last year, really addressing this and carrying it on, hopefully to some kind of a change this session. The public expectations of us are changing our data, how we use it, how we access it, how we maintain it, the security of that data, and all of these technologies that are going to be bombarding us from different directions. With that said, we need to work together to use this technology to catch criminals in the quickest and safest manner possible, always. How did A.L.P.R come into that discussion at the end of July? The A.L.P.R was able to quickly identify that the information that all of the witnesses that came forward to the public was wonderful. They stepped up to the plate. As we've seen in court case after court case, witness identification is shaky, but we do, as the questions have alluded, how do you know where these systems are? We go door to door with canvas, we talk to people, we start putting lists together. Witness had the right plate amongst many. We ran the A.L.P.R data, we confirmed that. We did have one unfortunate young man with a revoked driver's license get stopped in Woodbury while the news helicopters flew all over the top of him. That was before we got the license plate reader data to confirm that we had the right vehicle. We could share that in an earnest manner with the public, with the law enforcement community, to get that accurate description out quickly. That license plate reader data was just over a month old. It shows the need to hold it probably longer than some of us are comfortable with, and to get that going. But once that was done, we quickly reduced the risk to the community. We were able to pull together the resources to start focusing on the right bad person. I think the news media reported that the A.L.P.R ID'd the suspect. That is not true. It did help ID a white male with no hair in the vehicle a month earlier, but it could not. There's absolutely no way that you could take that photo and say who's driving that car. It wouldn't be possible. Even on a TV show with all of their CSI magic technology, you would not get to that point. It's one small piece of a larger puzzle that still requires a lot of people to work together. There have been many questions from the committee about how you get to private data. We go out, we knock on doors, we talk to people, we use the same investigative techniques that people trained on years ago to get into this field, and that's talking to people, going out and putting it together. It is a people business. This helps speed up the process and focus it where it should be on the bad guys, safely, efficiently. Again, it's an invaluable tool that helps bring this quickly to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Any other questions? Chair Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first, Chief Adjutant here, my condolences on behalf of the committee and folks for Officer Patrick, who's a brave officer and served our community well. And because you're in Mendota Heights, St. Paul, chances you're part of St. Paul anyway, so, but thank you for that. And in speaking to the use of license plate reader data in this instance, as you mentioned, one of the debates of last session was whether this pool of data, which is already there and exists, should be readily available to be looked at by law enforcement, or whether it's sensitive enough because there are a lot of innocent people whose driving habits are contained therein, whether it should be subject to the requirements of a warrant, for example, to crack it open and peer inside at a situation like the defendant in this murder. How would you feel about that? I suspect in this instance, any judge would readily crack that open for you to peer into. How would you feel about a criteria like that in order to peer into the activities of a pool of folks who are otherwise innocent?
Chief Ashenberger.
Representative Lesh. Over the years, we've had those criteria placed upon us for a variety of different information, cell phone data, pending data. It depends on how that language is crafted and the type of warrant and the time frame. Based upon this case and what happened to that young man in Woodbury for driving without a driver's license in a small green car, which is what we had initially, and those license plates. An administrative warrant, subpoena, something like we do with cell phones, the emergency exceptions. I think that the primary goal is to not put the public at any greater risk than they need to be, and to get as quickly as possible to that. I don't think law enforcement's bucking on having some restrictions on how this data is used. I believe that it is important enough that we are willing to work on having a uniform set of policies and rules around it. But exactly where that comes in, I think it's going to fall upon your committee to have the foresight to make sure that in a situation where it is something that is hot, something that is ongoing and breaking quickly, that that information is as useful as possible. If something bad happens when you could have had the information, we might as well get rid of it.
Any other questions? I feel like we need to kind of move on. The law enforcement contact, we said it'd be about 30 to 40 minutes, so Chief, did you have anything else you'd like to add?
Okay, thank you for the...
All right, thank you, and you must be Ken Reed?
No.
Oh.
My name is Gordon Ramsey. I'm the police chief in Duluth.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've gotten ahead of myself here. Chief Ramsey, welcome to the committee. If you could briefly tell your story of success and we'll kind of move on.
Madam Chair, committee members, I will make it quick. I'm here to just briefly give you an overview of a kidnapping we had of a young girl who was about 10 years old several years ago in West Duluth. She was out walking her dog. She was grabbed by a man in a passing vehicle. Her and her dog were placed in the trunk of the vehicle, and she was driven just on the other side of the St. Louis River in Wisconsin, stripped, tied to a tree, and sexually assaulted. The suspect then left her. She was able to escape after some time, able to get herself untied, and proceeded through the woods to a area establishment where she told them what happened. Investigation after a couple days revealed a suspect, possible suspect. We knew the approximate time that she was kidnapped. We checked the suspect's registered vehicles, ran his license plate against the license plate reader that was operating in that area on a squad car. And it just happened they passed at a certain time right at the base of Spirit Mountain, stamped the time, the location. And that little piece of evidence was critical in successful federal prosecution of a sex offender. The criticality of that license plate reader in that case really was, it's hard to put into words, but very critical case, very rare case for us. We had just purchased that license plate reader a short time prior to that, and it made me a believer in the good that they could do in our communities.
Thank you, Chief Ramsey. Chair Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Chief Ramsey, I forgot to ask this question of Chief Ashenberger, but I asked it to the other chiefs, I asked you. Do you know what percentage of the images you keep and retain for license plate readers are non-hit data? And what is your current practice for how long you hold this to?
Chief Ramsey.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, 60 days currently is our retention time. And our license plate readers, the two we have, are older technology, and it would be hand, we'd have to go through by hand and count all our hits and what we've done versus how many have been read. We haven't upgraded the technology because we're waiting to find out what happens here.
And
Chair Lesh.
So, is there really, do you really have no other database way of figuring it out? For example, when I get, a lot of times the tags I'll get detects in St. Paul, it'll say A.L.P.R hit. And so that goes down into our PC, and you can search that in our city attorney legal edge database and determine that you do not have a similar function in Duluth.
Chief Ramsey.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, with the recent, I think it was a case on the East Coast that highlighted the issue I think you're hitting on. And it wasn't until that point where I realized that the technology did not collect that data automatically for us, and that it would have to be a hand lookup. We have attempted to keep a log in the 2 vehicles that have those to keep track of it that way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Lash. Any other quick questions? Seeing none, thank you, Chief. Mr. Reed, Officer Reed, last place on my list here. Welcome to the committee. If you'd state your name for the record, please.
My name is Kenneth Reed. I'm commander of the St. Paul Police Department, acting as executive of Chief Smith.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. All of us in law enforcement came to the table today in hopes and expectations that uniform guidelines for L.P.R. use can be established, which allow us the ability to stay technologically current and effective in fulfilling our public safety mission. It is important that in this upcoming legislative session, the L.P.R. debate does come to closure for 2 reasons. The current temporary iPad designation that L.P.R. data is private or non-public data, which was sought by the Minneapolis Police Department about just short of 3 years ago, expires on August 1st, 2015, after which it becomes, again, public data with likely all the attendant issues that created in the past. Also, as several of the chiefs have alluded to, many agencies have delayed implementation of L.P.R. programs, which do, as you've heard, provide public safety benefits because of the 2 years now, this is coming into the 3rd year debate, and they are waiting and have been waiting to see that the issues get settled before they take down those programs. The uniformity we're looking for includes a standard retention period, limited but effective access to L.P.R. data for investigation purposes, effective administration of the L.P.R. data, including consequences for abuse, and appropriate accountability safeguards. Towards those ends, law enforcement has previously offered and stands by the following, which the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association has begun work on crafting into a proposed model policy for the entire state. Those following are such: that L.P.R. data be classified as confidential data here forward, except for some summary data exceptions as we'll note later. That all L.P.R. data be destroyed no later than 180 days from the time of collection, unless it becomes part of an active criminal investigation. That the chief, sheriff, or responsible authority establish written procedures, and those procedures would be as follows: ensuring that law enforcement personnel have access to L.P.R. data only by written authorization from the chief, sheriff, or designee.
And excuse me just a minute, members, there is a delineation of these items in your packet. Continue, Commander.
Madam Chair. Requiring that law enforcement personnel receive training on applicable law, department policy, and use of the L.P.R. and software, and only those who are trained may access the data. Mandating that access to L.P.R. data is based only upon a standard of reasonable suspicion, and that records be maintained, including identification of the authorized user who accessed the data, the reasonable factual basis for the query, and the associated case number, complaint, or event for each of those queries. The procedure should also specify that persons accessing the data and cite compliance with data practices, data access requirements, including Minnesota Statute 1305 Subdivision 5, which is the data protection portion, 13.09, which is the misdemeanor penalty portion for misuse, and obviously 13.82, which is the law enforcement section of the Data Practices Act. Lastly, that the procedure specifies that A.L.P.R. data may only be shared with another law enforcement agency if that agency complies with those retention guidelines and provides a reasonable suspicious basis for the request and an intended case file number. In addition, law enforcement, we stand by that there's a maintenance of logs, which are to be public and which are to contain the following. This will be summary data I referred to earlier. The specific time of day that L.P.R. data are collected, the aggregate number of vehicles or license plates that data are collected for each period of active use, and for a reader at a stationary location, and this, if I remind those who were involved last session, came up in some of the testimony. The location where the reader was actively collecting data, unless that location disclosure involves critical infrastructure, which would be a security risk and would invoke a designation of security data under Minnesota Statute 13.37. The law enforcement agency must also maintain logs showing the date the data was collected and how the data was classified according to Representative Lesch's queries. In addition, a biennial audit conducted by the responsibility will be required, somewhat like a procedures audit, to make sure that everything and everyone's following the rules and doing an accountability log. Safe and Home program participants may request purges of the data collected on them as long as they remain active participants in their program, and this request must be honored unless the data is part of a criminal investigative file. And just as a reminder, these are the procedures that we will be putting forward. And lastly, law enforcement must notify the BCA within 10 days of installing or if they currently use an L.P.R. system, and the BCA must maintain a list of agencies currently using L.P.Rs, including the location of stationary readers, unless that location disclosure involves critical infrastructure, which would be a security risk, and invoke designation of as security data under 13.37. In closing, your chief and their representatives believe that what I've just presented to you forms the entire structure for strong and supportable legislation that meets, in almost all cases, exceeds laws promulgated in any jurisdiction in the United States. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commander. Chair Lesch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commander Lee, can you tell me what percentage of the plate images that St. Paul maintains are non-hit data?
Commander Reed.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesch, the way our system works is that it, as Ron testified earlier, it just collects the data, and it isn't until the operator, as they're moving down the street, get a hit, that they have to actively select that be recorded as a hit. And where that becomes a problem in answering their question is that as operators are driving down the road, and we use our L.P.Rs on squad cars, so they're moving down public roadways and byways, they pass many such hits, particularly for suspended driver's license and that. They may be en route to their own call that they've been dispatched to, and they can't afford to take the time to stop that. So they'll never actively select that hit would be recorded. Okay, so the only ones that we know of are ones where they've actively, where a hit has occurred, the system has shown that there's an active hit against the hot list. The officer has verified that information, and they take enforcement action upon it. And they can select to hold, to that to be stored as a hit. And then we also ask that they log it because it's not always, many times they either forget to do that or in any case, it's not accurate. And the end result is that we've not had a need really to research that. I know that we had a data request by a person who has some of that information, but it's not accurate. And as far as the inspector also talked about hits that are not, this is based on optical character recognition. And so as an L.P.R. is driving down the street, it might see a wrought iron fence as a series of ones, and it will record and hit those. So I can give you, I don't have the actual number, that's the short answer to your question, because we've never really done it. We know the aggregate number of reads that we have, and we know the hits that the officers had selected because they actively engaged on that particular hit. Beyond that, and we've never aggregated or counted that. I know there was a data practices request that came up with some figure. That would be, but it would be specious for me to answer it because I don't have an accurate answer for it.
Chair Lesh.
Commander Reed, have you ever, as the St. Paul Police Department, ever received a discovery demand by a defense attorney to use the information contained in those images as potentially exculpatory data for purposes of criminal litigation?
Commander Reed.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, not to my knowledge. That's not to say it hasn't happened, but not to my personal knowledge.
Well, Madam Chair, the reason I'm curious is, of course, those are two different standards for discovery and disclosure. But the reason why that's important to me, Commander Reed, is what we're operating on now and what this commission is operating now is in the understanding is still the best information we have is the Star Tribune study from over 2 years ago that showed 99.2% was not hit data. And that's the assumption I'm later under. So to the extent that any other departments can provide maybe some mitigating information, I would like to see that as well. And if, like the mailbox or the cyclone fence is included in that, then that matters to me too. But I won't know that until I get some alternative information from some other department. So thanks for answering that. So,
Senator Dibble and Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Commander Reed, for this. It's some interesting ideas, a thoughtful approach, much appreciated, but a little late. Because of course we know that this technology and this data gathering was going on for a few years. Before the article started appearing in the paper, and they got all hopped up about it. So my question is, are the chiefs and the sheriffs working on a larger policy around the implementation of new surveillance technologies that would follow along these lines so that we don't discover something in the paper and then have to run around with our hair on fire for a couple of years before we solve it? I mean, clearly, the police agencies and with the BCA are super interested in acquiring ever more novel forms of surveilling the public in general. And then we kind of find out about it after the fact, and there's been no consideration ahead of time about who's being surveilled and how the data is being used and collected and disseminated. And then we go retroactively and twist it up and try to create laws to respond after the fact. This is kind of going into Mr. Gemble's really testimony. So are we working on something that would be more proactive, establishing some guidance, some laws, and procedures and practices as we start bringing on more and more sophisticated forms of surveillance technology in public safety agencies?
Commander Reed.
Madam Chair and Senator Dibble, as time has gone on and these new technologies come out, there's always a lot of discourse and amongst law enforcement agencies through various associations and the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and primarily as a leading body for us in looking at these issues. The answer to your question is that a comprehensive overall technological policy framework, to my knowledge, has not been considered. It's on a technology by technology basis that they have rolled out in the past and where we are right now.
Chair Dibble.
Well, clearly we're going to tackle that subject and we're going to try to get ahead of the game as a commission, as a legislature, and I would invite the chiefs and the sheriffs to be partners with us in that. So, because there's some good stuff here. I like it a lot. So rather than us being kind of adversarial on the subject, it would be great to be really trying to assist in the mission of public safety and also further the general public acceptance and trust of the work that you're doing.
Commander Reed.
Madam Chair, Senator Dibble, I'd like to introduce again Chief Gordon Ramsey, he can answer that question on behalf of the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association.
And we do allow a phone a friend on this committee. So, welcome to the committee, Chief Ramsey.
Madam Chair, Senator Dibble, your message is heard loud and clear. We definitely want to be a part of this. The Chiefs Association has been working on this for the last couple of years as well, hitting on exactly what you're talking about. And the next topic, body cameras, is how one way we're hoping to show that we are engaging and want to be at the table and ahead of any problems that may come up. Thank you.
All right, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a phenomenal question from Senator Dibble. I have some experience in some panels. I just actually spoke a month ago on the NCSL panel with a number of law enforcement chiefs from around the country. And there is a prevailing thought out there within the law enforcement community that, in fact, you're not obligated to share technological capabilities, and maybe even shouldn't, on the basis that this provides the public too much information about quote-unquote security and tactics information, and that's become a very common rebuttal when it comes to disclosing these technological capabilities ahead of time to the citizen policymakers who ultimately decide which laws are being implemented and how that affects, criminal justice in general. So just to add to that comment that, if you're willing to come to the table with a measure of sort of disclosure ahead of time on technological capabilities, you might be stepping outside of the norm in the law enforcement community, and that would be fantastic. Question I have is more practical around this proposal. Why, just curious, because I have my own opinion about data retention, but why 180 days for retention of the data? If the underlying premise is that retaining data for 180 days will keep us safer because we'll have more data to cross-check against hot lists and so on and so forth, of course that logic could be extended to 360 days and 720 and so on and so forth. And the truth is that if we retained all data, with every technological means that we had necessary, we could prevent a lot of crime and we could apprehend a lot of criminals. Of course, there's a line there where we decide that that's not acceptable as a society. So I'm just curious about why it's 180 days versus anything else. Why not 360 days?
Commander Reed.
Madam Chair and Representative, I will tell you that this 180 days, and you're aware that we've been in session several years on this issue. 180 days was chosen based on information in Minnesota that we haven't had anything much longer than beyond 180 days. There didn't seem to be any value to us. Our preference, realistically, if you asked everyone who uses L.P.R, a year would be great, because we recognize the value of it when it comes. And investigations don't happen in 5 days, 10 days, 30 days, or 90 days. It may not be you get the report of an incident until 90 days, 100 days, 120. That's why there's a statute of limitations of 3 years that a case can be brought forward to the courts to allow enough time for that to happen. So, I mean, the realistic answer, we'd love more. But based on the information that we have and the cases that have occurred in the state of Minnesota, it doesn't seem to make sense to go beyond 180 days. And that gives us enough leeway that we feel comfortable we're not going to lose something that would be worthy to a victim to have their case solved.
And Senator Peterson, just so you're aware, we had a floor amendment by Representative Hillstrom for 180 days that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think got less than a dozen votes on the House. So it pretty much went down in flames. So I think there's room for debate on the storage. Certainly, law enforcement has put together, they did most of this work that you see in the document was done during 2014 in the conference committee, and we just could get past the date issue to get to some of the particulars of their proposal. So, but they've certainly been at the table. They've met with myself and Shirlesh a number of times and others. So It's not that they haven't been engaged, they've been very engaged, but as I said, all this information goes public when the temporary classification expires in August of 2015, so it's time to finish up the dance, I think, and get it over, but
Yeah.
Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I support, on the record, I supported the House position all along throughout that process. But so my fear is, and it gets back to, again, disclosing ahead of time what the capabilities are, is that it seems as if the prevailing attitude is that law enforcement is only restricted by current technological means in terms of surveilling the population. In other words, as you pointed out, if we had other devices outside of A.L.P.R. or outside of cellular exploitative devices and other things, then we would in fact use those and use the same rationale that you just laid out, which is that we ought to retain this data because it helps us solve crimes, and 180 days might make sense. So that's concerning to me, because that tells me that whenever this new thing comes out, and inevitably it will, the same sort of logic and underlying sort of foundational philosophy will be applied to that, which is that we can and we should retain data for 6 months, which, by the way, will tell you a lot about somebody's lifestyle. Is there any sort of underlying philosophy other than current means that sort of, and I won't even go there because that's way too highfalutin and philosophical, but that's my concern, and that's what it seems to be. And you know, maybe I'll just ask one more question, and it's really, it is sort of philosophical, but why should the government maintain and track and record the movements and activities of civilians without cause for 6 months? Is there anything wrong with that in your mind? Is there any drawback to that scenario?
Commander Reed. I know, police officers like to ask the questions, not answer them.
No, this takes us back a long way. I've heard a lot about that in 2012 was the first time we heard about it. We started our L.P.R. program well before that, and it was well publicized. We made a point to engage the new media and let them know we have this new technology. And it was new, very new at that time. So, in some ways, it hurt me because I was actually the one responsible for putting together this understanding so that our community knew we were having this out there. Along with the consideration of doing that, we did a lot of research, at least research on what was currently out there and who was using it and what they were. And therein you find the variance of retention times all over the world, from 10 days to 5 years. You asked us, we're going to bring this technology in, and we have to consider that. And in actuality, we did consider the privacy implications, and we actually, when we created our policy, and it took some time, we asked privacy advocates to look at that policy, and for all intents and purposes, without an official literature, they vetted it and said, that's a good policy. So we were very comfortable at the time, and that policy took into account limited access to who could access the data, what the reason is accessing for, logging of that access so that we'd have a record of it. And the only hitch came in 2012. What we hadn't considered was 13.82 and the implications of public data versus private or confidential data. And that, while it did.
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, Chief Ramsey, and we're going to have to wrap up. I know there's been a number of questions, and we're way over the amount of time for law enforcement of this issue. We have a whole nother issue, and with body cams plus 2 kind of housekeeping things for the commission. I did want to be done by noon, so if you'd like to briefly respond, and then I'd ask the commissioner, maybe we could move on to some of the privacy folks to talk about some of these issues as well. Chief Ramsey.
Madam Chair, I will make it quick. Senator, we are at the table. We have very thoughtful policies that address a lot of your concerns. Who can access the data? It's audited. There has to be a case number and a reason for it. That we support being put into legislation to track that as well. We are at the table. This is very, very important for law enforcement in keeping our community safe. As we told those stories earlier, we want to find the balance between the privacy concerns as well as the public safety issues that we face every day in our jobs.
Thank you. Chair Lesch, briefly.
Okay, and I just have to say this, Madam Chair, and thank you, and I appreciate you indulging some of the time, but Chief Ramsey, that balance, I think has been presented. And that balance is a mutual review of who and when has access to that data. That then means a neutral judge. I just think that it's been out there, but it's been resisted because I think law enforcement thinks, well, no, if the chief signs up, it's okay. It's not okay. This is still law enforcement. There has to be that balance. So I would really urge law enforcement to take a look at that, think about it. For all the reasons that you cited in the instances where it's absolutely necessary, that sign-off would be no problem whatsoever. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
If I end up on YouTube, I'm going to be upset.